Hey guys, welcome to Notes and Errata. I'm your host Chris, and today we're going to be talking about Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. So this novel has been talked about a lot, written about a lot. It was covered heavily by the press when it was first published in 1996, and it is in some ways a polarizing novel. Readers tend to either love it and worship it, or they kind of dismiss it as intellectual snobbery or a sort of academic imaginative circle jerk. For me, generally, I had positive reactions to the novel, although I can see where the negative feelings are coming from, and that's something I'm going to touch upon throughout this review. So I'm going to begin by giving you a brief introduction to the book, and then I'm going to talk about its style, organization, and format, give you a little look into the world of Infinite Jest, its major storylines and characters, and then end with a discussion of one of its major themes. So first of all, it's definitely one of the most unusual and difficult books I've ever read. You know, it contains some of the most hilarious, some of the most bizarre passages I've ever read. And then there's also a kind of heaviness and a sadness, a tragedy about the book. To David Foster Wallace's chagrin, the press and the reviewers at the time of its publication really focused on the comic side of the book and its bizarreness. And truth be told, I feel like some of the tragedies, some of the sadness of the story does get buried in the constant bizarreness of the world you're in and the kind of bizarrely hilarious situations that you're reading about. So let's start by talking about the novel's organization and format. First of all, it's a very long book, clocking in at around 1,100 pages, depending on your edition. And the text is, as you can see, it is fairly small. And some parts of this book are hard to get through. You know, I believe some of it was overwritten. Probably about 100 pages don't really need to be there. Did we need to meet, for instance, the characters Kate Gomper and Jim Trolch? The book also does not have conventional chapters. It instead moves around in time using headings that give a date or a gist of what will follow. Both the writing style and the narration style vary throughout as well. Some parts are narrated in first person by various characters. Some parts are narrated in third person. Some sections are letters, some are interviews. There are also 388 endnotes, which spans about 150-ish pages, and the text of the endnotes is even smaller than the text of the book. And some of these endnotes themselves have footnotes. Some of the endnotes, they feel utterly pointless, and they are. Some are kind of semi-important and give little gists or little bits of info that are helpful. And then some of them are actually truly helpful. Some of them actually add new dimensions to the novel and to the story. There are also many, many characters in Infinite Jest. So much so that keeping all their stories straight can be challenging. You know, in fact, I think if you don't read this novel within the span of a couple months, it's going to be difficult to keep track of a lot of what's going on. And, you know, there's a staggering amount of detail in the novel, so I don't think it's really possible to comprehend everything in it the first time you read through it, even if you're careful. And to these points, there is a wiki devoted to Infinite Jest, which I've linked down in the description below. And it includes annotations by page, an alphabetical index, a character diagram, among other things. And I'd suggest using it as a tool when you first read through this book. The annotations will help a great deal, especially with defining words you won't understand or know. Trust me, there will be a good number. Wallace obviously loved language, and he employs everything from medical terminology to words like ghost word and phantods to even his own invented words. Here I'd like to linger on Wallace's style for a moment to give you a sense of what you'll encounter in the novel. So at times he writes these very, very long sentences of upwards of 50 words or more, and they're in strange syntax, or they have many clauses. Sometimes they have a thought break in them, and the thought break is longer than the original sentence. Sometimes a sentence will have multiple thought breaks. So in certain instances, the language is kind of has a visionary, breathtaking quality to it, where you kind of get almost into a flow state reading it, and you're just immersed. Other times, it becomes a kind of academic jargony slog, and so I guess there's a lot of variation to the actual sentence level style of the novel, and it moves from this kind of flowing, beautiful, visionary prose to this kind of headache-inducing academic jargon. All right, so I'd like to give you a high-level overview of the world of Infinite Jest and the major storylines and characters now. The book takes place in a parodic, dystopian near future. As I said, the novel was published in 1996, and its near future takes place over a 9-year span, sometime between 2001 and 2012. It's a little difficult to exactly nail down the timeline based on what's provided to you in the narrative, and scholars themselves disagree on the exact timeline. But the novel primarily takes place in, get this, the year of the depend adult undergarment. So this near future takes place in what's called subsidized time. It's a period when the names of calendar years are referred to by the name of their corporate sponsor. So this development is supposed to be the end result, or the logical result, of advertising's relentless search for new markets. But it is also, more specifically, an invention of Johnny Gentles, who is the U.S. president in this near future. And he uses the winning corporation's bid to help pull the economy out of recession and pay for his program to literally clean the U.S. Here's a little calendar of the subsidized time years that the novel takes place in. So, although the book takes place in a reality very different from our own, the reader isn't really eased into this in any way. Instead, the book is written as though its author is living in this world, and so is his audience. Because of this, it takes some time for you to develop a grasp of how this near future other world works. And this is a reason why some people might dislike this novel. It's very jarring to kind of get into. You have to ease into it over the course of a couple hundred pages. To that point, the book's format also doesn't lend itself to a quick grasp of what's exactly going on. As I mentioned before, it doesn't really have chapters and changes speakers, narration style, and moves around in time. I like to think of the book as an incomplete mosaic. You're given a lot of information, but some things just aren't there. For example, the novel doesn't exactly resolve. It builds various storylines, but you're left to piece together just what exactly happened to, for instance, Hal, or what the fate of the master copy of the entertainment, the Samizdat, Infinite Jest, was. And this seemingly unresolving story is part of why some people might really dislike the novel as well. So there are 3 major storylines running throughout the novel, 2 of which center around geographic locations in metropolitan Boston, and 1 of which centers around a group of terrorists. The first story is the story of the Enfield Tennis Academy, or ETA, the Incandenza family that runs the academy, and the academy's students and staff. The most important of the ETA figures are the school's founder, James O. Incandenza, who is dead at the time of the narrative, appearing mostly in flashbacks and in a couple scenes as his own wraith, and his youngest son, Hal, who is often thought of as the novel's protagonist. ETA is an elite tennis academy that trains children to play in the show, which is the term used for professional tennis. The academy also provides a sophisticated and somewhat esoteric curriculum for its students. They have courses in things like advanced grammar and optics, for example. The second story is the story of the Ennett House Drug and Alcohol Recovery House and its residents. And yes, the title of the halfway house actually uses house twice. The most important of the Enfield House figures are Dawn Gately and Joelle Van Dyne, also known as Madame Psychosis, also known as the prettiest girl of all time, or Pea-Goat. Through the inhabitants of the Enfield House, we learn a ton about the inner workings of Alcoholics Anonymous and drug addiction and the experience of recovering addicts. The third story is the story of the AFR, or the Wheelchair Assassins. Their actual name is a French name, and I don't want to butcher it. These are a wheelchair-bound Quebec separatist group and terrorist cell. The most important figure of the AFR is Remy Maraith, and he acts as a kind of spokesman for the group in the novel. One of the longest single scenes in the novel, although appearing in stints across hundreds of pages, involves Maraith and takes place on an outcropping of a mountainside overlooking Tucson, Arizona, where Maraith and Hugh Steepley of the U.S. Office of Unspecified Services have a clandestine meeting and an in-depth conversation concerning, among other things, national identity. The storylines are connected through a film by James O. Incandenza titled Infinite Jest, and also known as The Samizdat. It's also referred to as The Entertainment. It's described as lethally entertaining, meaning the film is so entertaining that viewers will watch it until they literally die. That means that they actually will not get up from watching the film. They'll starve or die of thirst. The AFR is seeking the film because they wish to use it as a terrorist weapon to further their separatist ends. The Enfield House Drug and Alcohol Recovery House is connected to the film because Joelle Van Dyne, she was the ex-fiance of James O. Incandenza's oldest son, Oren, and she had developed a strong platonic relationship with James in the later years of his life and acted in many of his films, including the lethally entertaining Infinite Jest. Based on my descriptions, you might have the impression that this novel is rather chaotic. And it is true that the mixture of the novel's unusual formatting, variations in writing and narration style, their large cast of characters, and the frequent digressions can make the book feel really chaotic. This discursiveness and apparent chaos are more reasons why some people are not fond of this novel. But despite this chaos, which Wallace maintained was surface level, there are overarching themes, and once you start to see them, you can't unsee the strands they weave through Infinite Jest. One of the most important themes of this book is addiction. Not just drug addiction, but addiction with a capital A. That is, the seemingly universal human desire to self-forget via obsession with something. In other words, we like to minimize our self-consciousness and get addicted to the particular way we choose to do so. Hal Condenza describes people as engaging in a flight from in the form of a plunging into. That is, people seem to make an escape from life through diving headlong into something that totally consumes their attention and keeps it directed away from themselves. Hal says that the all-consuming thing we escape into takes forms as varied as God or Satan, politics or grammar, topology or philately, games or needles, some other person. and that the form it takes isn't as important as the universal need itself. I think this is insightful, and it's really a kind of traditional wisdom, which sort of runs counter to the very postmodern format of the novel itself. And this is something Wallace noted in interviews. He said that the book was rather traditional. Its themes were rather traditional, even though it was kind of wrapped up in this unusual format. And I've actually wondered if that's part of the novel's brilliance. That Wallace is trying to show the persistence of traditional wisdom and innate drivenness to avoid, deny, and forget ourselves, regardless of how fragmented, chaotic, and discursive contemporary life is, especially contemporary American life. Another way of putting this is that Wallace intentionally obscures the underlying connective themes of the novel by constant digression, an endless cast of characters, and a fragmented format, and that he does this to mimic the way that we lose ourselves in the details of life. Still, another way to put this is that we forget what's important to us and what's important about life in the busyness and the triviality of the daily grind. Despite my general positivity about Infinite Jest, I am kind of wary to recommend it to others because of the amount of time it takes to read, and because of the real slog some of it is to read through. I think that it's an important book, even a great book, but I think you've got to be in the right place to read it. First, you'll need time. It'll take around 2 months to complete this, and you're going to have to read a little bit of it every day. Second, you're going to need patience because some of it truly is taxing to get through, and you're going to have moments where you'll want to give up. If you have the time and you're willing to suffer a little to get through Infinite Jest and have the experience that it offers, I'd say go for it. I'd consider, having a notepad ready, maybe some colored tabs, and consulting the wiki. When you finish Infinite Jest, I want to know what you think really happened to Hal, and if the AFR eventually did get a hold of the Entertainment's master copy. Also, I want to know if you think Hal is Wallace. Finally, did Joelle and Dawn ever happen?